Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. As always, I hope all of you are doing well and staying safe. Happy to be here today with my co-host, Zainab Chowdhury, the Director of CAIR's Maryland Outreach Office. Assalamu alaikum, Zainab. How are you?
Walaikum assalam, Edward. I'm well, alhamdulillah. How are you and your family?
Alhamdulillah, doing well, doing well. Look, we're very happy to have you on today for a special episode. We're going to be, to my understanding, premiering a short film that you and members of our community in Maryland have created to highlight a very important issue. And I think we all in the past week got a key reminder of what that issue is. We all know that Jacob Blake, an African-American man, was shot 7 times in the back in Kenosha, Wisconsin, just days ago by a police officer. He has survived the shooting, unlike many other unarmed men and women who were killed in situations like this. He is apparently possibly paralyzed from the waist down, but still fighting for life in the hospital. Obviously, this shooting has been just the latest in a series of incidents that have happened over the past several months, over the past several years, and indeed for decades. Obviously, civil rights groups like CAIR have been speaking up about this and addressing this issue as best we can. But it keeps happening, even though police officers know that the world is watching, even though we have made some incremental changes towards policy change, it still keeps happening. And so, Zainab, we're very happy to have you on to introduce the program and talk about how it ties into this broader issue. And hopefully, inshallah, this can be of benefit to not only the Muslim community in Maryland, not only the Muslim community in the United States, but everyone who watches this short film. Zainab, please.
Thank you so much, Edward. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. The story that you just mentioned, the incident that you just mentioned, Edward, of our brother Jacob Blake, who was shot in Wisconsin. As you mentioned, this is just one example of how African-American communities across the country have been forced to endure systemic racism and violence from different segments of society. And in the larger conversation about the national reckoning that our country is having around race, we felt that it was very important to highlight the contributions and the history and the legacy of the African-American Muslim community, specifically in Maryland. As somebody who was born and raised in Baltimore, who've lived there most of my life, I have been privileged to witness firsthand the impact and the contributions of specifically African-American Muslim leaders within Baltimore City. But as I entered into nonprofit work, I realized that a lot of those narratives were missing from the broader conversation when we talk about Islam and Muslims in America. And this isn't about the organization. This isn't about one individual. This is about a collective narrative of a community that is very rich and vibrant in their legacy and the contributions that they've made to not only the city of Baltimore, not only just in Maryland, but even far and beyond. Because as we know, many of the young people who were born and raised in Baltimore grew up to, do phenomenal things around the country. So one of the challenges, I think, in weaving together this narrative, which our producers were great, they were very instrumental in helping to weave together these stories. One of the challenges that we had was that, as you can imagine, Islam is not a monolith. And within the Muslim community, there's a wide variety of experiences and perspectives. And how do you do justice to bringing some of those stories to the forefront? So we hope and pray that inshallah, this short film will help do justice to some of those stories. One caveat, one disclaimer we just want to put out there on behalf of CAIR is that this is by no means a full snapshot of the story of Islam in Baltimore. This is just a microcosm of the broader picture, and our goal is to help kind of bring those stories to the forefront. Maryland is home to over 100,000 Muslims, and many of those Muslims have been contributing to society in different ways, and oftentimes their contributions are sidelined and marginalized. Specifically, African-American Muslims who have been at the forefront of paving the way for generations for Muslims in America. And so as a proud daughter of immigrants, I myself have been privileged to witness some of those contributions firsthand. I remember growing up, my father, Allah yarhamu, he used to tell my brothers and I stories of how he and my family we benefited from some of the contributions of especially African-American leaders in the city, Muslim leaders in the city. And we wanted to just use this opportunity to highlight some of those stories, highlight some of those contributions, and share some of the stories of, how the first masajid were established in Baltimore. And so it was really a privilege and an honor to be part of this project. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts barakah in it and that he allows it to be, a tool of education and understanding, something that can help bring our communities together, even as we try to, help our communities, be more cohesive and be more united in the fight for racial justice, not only broadly in our country, but also more specifically within the Muslim community in America.
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful. And I think, highlighting the rich history of Muslims in Baltimore, and in particular African-American Muslims, will highlight, I think, for the broader community, why issues that impact African-Americans, by definition, also impact Muslim Americans. The two are completely interrelated and connected. And so police brutality and other issues that might seem to uniquely impact African-Americans, those are Muslim issues as much as they are anyone else's issues. So we hope that this history will highlight that for the Muslim community and everyone else in the United States as well.
Absolutely. And we definitely want to acknowledge the community leaders who came forward and who gave their time to be part of this story. It was especially challenging, I think, compiling this during the pandemic, the challenges of social distancing and interviewing some of the key leaders who've been pioneers within our community. But alhamdulillah, we're grateful that the project is complete, and we hope that it's beneficial and educational to all those who view it, inshallah.
فاعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا. It says something at the beginning of it and at the end of it. At the beginning of this particular ayat, of this particular verse, part of this verse, is that it says, altogether hold fast to the rope of Allah, meaning hold fast to Islam, the faith of Islam. And then the second part, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, it says, and be not divided amongst yourselves. And so this is such a beautiful, beautiful ayat, a beautiful portion of this ayat. It's telling us, Allah says first, hold fast to Islam. Hold fast to the rope of Islam. And in this hold on to the rope of Islam, this beautiful faith of ours, we have in it justice, we have truth, we have healing, we have unity, we have goodwill, and also we have well-being, just in this first portion in Islam itself. And on the other side, it said, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, it said, do not divide amongst yourselves. Allah has made us into nations and tribes, and we can learn from each other and not divide from each other, or separate from each other. And so Allah just said in this one particular ayat, the portion of the ayat, and He's telling us to hold on fast to the rope of Allah, and then He's telling us, وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, and not divide amongst ourselves. Because in this beautiful faith of Islam, we have justice, we have truth, we have healing, we have unity, we have goodwill, and we have well-being.
So let me begin. On behalf of the Muslim Community Cultural Center, I'd like to welcome you. We are a community that has been here since 1990. This community is part of one of the 4 masajids in the Baltimore metropolitan area that originated from the Nation of Islam. But we see ourselves as the Muslims who were descendants of the ex-slaves who were brought here from the west coast of Africa in bondage as Muslims. Ironically, the only educated Muslims were only educated were Muslims. The rest of the slave population could not read and write because of the literary tradition in West Africa, Islam's literary tradition. Those brothers and sisters that came here in bondage and were chattel slaves, well, they could read and write, but they were not allowed to have the fullest Islamic expression. And later on, we'll talk about how that begins there and how that evolves in America and how that evolves up until the present day as we are here today. So I want to welcome you once again on behalf of the Muslim Community Cultural Center. I am Imam Earl Elamine. I have been the resident Imam here for the last 15 years.
I'm a member of Masjid al-Safat, and I've been a member of them since I became Muslim in 1976. Very proud to be a member of Masjid al-Safat, although it is a very small, nondescript masjid, incidentally the type that I like most.
I became Muslim in 1976 after leaving the service. I'm a Vietnam-era vet, and I became Muslim right after that, after leaving the service. And then I moved here to Baltimore, and 4 years later, in 1980, and I went straight to Masjid al-Safat, who is the oldest masjid in Baltimore City.
Please come in. We're going to go to the Musalla, and then we'll begin our dialogue.
It was the first masjid, and I'm going to say in Maryland, that was Orthodox. And I'm going to say first because the brothers and sisters that began, that were the pioneers of Masjid al-Safat. Before Masjid al-Safat, they had to go to New York every Friday for Jummah. Sometimes they would go to the Islamic Center in DC, but for various reasons, it was more, okay, so DC, I think they told me then that the khutbahs were in Arabic, so they couldn't get the full meaning of it, even though they, the spiritual satisfaction they got, but they couldn't understand it. And then when they went to New York, they found, quite frankly, an indigenous Muslim masjid. They felt more included, and that's where they went in their little hoopty cars, because nobody had any money. Nobody had the most latest cars. They had the hoopty cars that they were hoping and praying would get them up to New York every Jummah, if you can imagine.
Here in the Musalla, as you know, the Muslim Community Cultural Center of Baltimore, we just don't have Jummah prayer. It is a community cultural center. We host international guests we've had scholars from Al-Azhar, we've had scholars from Morocco, we've had scholars from Uzbekistan. We host the religious studies departments from Morgan State University, Johns Hopkins University, the students there, and as well as Towson State University. Have all come here. We do similar to what we're doing here to talk about the history of Islam in Baltimore. Imam Bashar Arafat has been responsible for bringing a lot of our dignitaries and our scholars from abroad to come here because many folks don't know about the history and the evolution of Islam here in America.
Late 70s, and I would say early 80s, just about everyone from the immigrant community who used to pray Jummah or 5 times daily prayers, they went to Masjid Safa.
At that time, in addition to indigenous Muslims, immigrant Muslims would come there because there was no place else to go to practice Orthodox Islam.
We used to be in John Hopkins Schaefer Hall. The Schaefer Hall, actually, from mid-70s all the way to the early 80s. Every Sunday, the immigrant community particularly, and the local people also started coming in. Used to get together over there. We had the Sunday classes, and there was a beautiful actually facility.
We have to go back to the 1971, like I said. At the time, the organized practice of the Sunnah here in Baltimore was through ISB, the Islamic Society in Baltimore. They would meet at Johns Hopkins School, University on Sundays, and they would read some tafsir of the Quran, and they would make Salat al-Dhuhr. And some names here, these people have passed away, many of them. Dr. Awad, this was before Dr. Shafi, there was Dr. Shami, Dr. Shaukat Khan, they would meet every Sunday.
When Masjid Safa was established, it was the only masjid in Maryland, and it was the only place that Muslims who wanted to make salah and wanted to observe Eid prayers, was the only place that they could go. But over the years, that fact has been ignored or forgotten, subjugated, suppressed, whatever word you want to use for it, has not been given the importance that it should be.
When I came back here to Baltimore to establish Masjid al-Safa, we would also go there and attend those meetings on Sunday. Now, once we established the masjid in that apartment, we would invite every Muslim that we knew about to come. We established Salat al-Jumu'ah. As far as we know, that this was the first Salat al-Jumu'ah that was established in Maryland, not just Baltimore, but in Maryland. And then gradually, people came to know about Sunni Islam.
A significant number of individuals decided that they wanted to really delve into Sunni Islam and became dedicated to Islam on the path of this deen, and the incredible growth of Islam, I think, was spared by what came out of the Nation of Islam. And then, even with Muhammad Ali, notables as Malcolm X, people were inspired. Although Malcolm had left the community, and one of the things that I was, as a kid, I met both of these luminary figures at Masjid al-Haq.
The icons, as I said, what I was going to tell you something, that Muhammad Ali learned how to make salah in this musalla. He learned how to understand and make his prayers in this musalla. Ali used to come in and out of here all the time. The first Imam here was Imam Ronald Shaker. And he and Imam Shaker were very, very close. As a matter of fact, when Imam Shaker died, Ali was the first one on the first row at the janazah. So Ali used to come. He used to joke all the time. He was a big prankster. But this is where he learned to formally understand what he was doing, and from Qiyam to Sajda and back to Qiyam and Jalsa. He got to understand that. And so that's our so-called claim to fame. But I think that is a good thing. But what Elijah Muhammad was able to produce was just not Muhammad Ali. He was able to produce Malcolm X.
By the grace and mercy of Allah, I was able to accept Islam in Brooklyn, New York in 1971. This is after returning from Vietnam. It was actually there that I decided to become Muslim after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, hence the name Malik. This is the reason why I chose the name Malik. At that time, there was no masjid here in Baltimore. So I, along with about 5 other brothers, established Masjid al-Safa. That was approximately August 1971.
And many of the early temples, they established their own school system. It is the first African-American private school system. They called them it was called the University of Islam. and that was the first African-American school system in the United States.
Yes, I came through and was part of what I call the early years here in Baltimore of establishing the Sunnah. But at the same time, I recognized that there were a lot of factors that informed that, a lot of factors that contributed to that. So I think that's misunderstood. I think when you have people sharing their narratives, a lot of times that narrative is told from a singular perspective, and that's understandable. But the reality of things is that we don't understand how all of these things came into play.
I think one of the big misunderstandings about Islamic history, is that they think that all African Americans came through the Nation of Islam. And like Malik, I also did not come through the Nation of Islam. I came right into Quran and Sunnah, and Allah knows best.
Islam in America begins, as I said, outside in the west coast of Africa, but it comes into the United States in slavery. The chattel slavery, that institution, that diabolical institution. But out of that, because the Muslims weren't allowed to have their fullest expression, they were able to hold on to the rope of Allah.
Looking back to how Islam originated in America, it started with slavery. So Islam is the reason why America has seen Islam and Muslims is from slaves from America, and they play an integral part of the representation of Muslims within America, and we just cannot forget.
Many of the slaves that were transported here came from Muslim countries. And there have been, there's documented evidence that Muslims wrote treatises in Arabic and essays in Arabic and studied and practiced Islam.
Islam came with us as African slaves, and then we came through the Middle Passage, and we were also Muslim while we were slaves. We couldn't practice that as much as we would like to practice. And then beyond that, alhamdulillah, we're still Muslim.
Initially, we had the dawah to teach the true teachings of Tawheed and the Sunnah. And people started coming into Islam. As I said, I myself, I did not come through the Nation of Islam. I came directly into praying 5 times a day. I used to copy hadith in New York by hand and started to learn Arabic, the Quran, etc.
And so out of that emerged personalities. Salih Bilal, Omar ibn Said, Abdul Rahman, the Prince of Slaves, Yaro Mahmoud, Ibn Diallo, all of these personalities emerged. And around 1911, the United Negro Improvement Association, under the leadership of Marcus Garvey, started a movement. And that movement became a very, very large movement. His mentor was a gentleman by the name of Dus Muhammad. Dus Muhammad was an African, and so he influenced Garvey. Garvey's mission statement was one God, one aim, one destiny.
I've lived in Baltimore all my life. I've been here for the last 67 years. I came via the Nation of Islam in 1961. My parents came through the Nation of Islam. At the death of Mr. Muhammad, many of those who were part of the nation actually became Muslim and started following Sunni Islam. And that was probably one of the biggest growth of Islam in North America. Because like, for the most part, many of the immigrant Muslims did not come and interact with African Americans. And I think with what Mr. Muhammad did in terms of dignifying African American, hands down, I think that was the turning point, in part of the growth of Islam in America.
Well, I'm always asked the question, well, how did so many people get attracted to Islam? Dr. C.R. Lincoln also coins the term, not only the proto-Islamic movement, but he also coins the term genetic memory. He says that in your genetic memory, that you heard in your genes the word Allah, Quran, Muhammad, Salah. So all of those things were in your genetic memory, and that when you heard those, you were attracted to Islam.
People come to the masajid all the time, during Ramadan and not during Ramadan. They'll come and they'll ask for help. And they know for the most part, although we don't have the largely developed facilities and services, they know they'll get some help by coming to the masjid.
When you take a look at the community of up and around Masjid al-Haq and Druid Heights, so many of the children in that community, Masjid al-Haq was a central hub for Islam at one point. That the community would come there, they would have their the Wednesday dawah, and they would feed the community, but also really give them the type of Islamic knowledge to help them to grow, not only to understand Islam, but as individuals. Because many of those same young children that came to the masjid, I see them as adults, and they remember the faces. They said, look, coming to Masjid al-Haq really helped change my life. The quality of life, the quality of the person that I am.
Inshallah, we as African Americans that are Muslim, perhaps some of our relatives who couldn't practice Islam as slaves, maybe they made the dua that they couldn't practice it, but maybe their next generation can practice Islam.
In 1946, a gentleman came here from Washington, D.C. by the name of Charles Rashid. He was a barber. And so, you know, as in the barber, he always, as we say, tablighin people, he was always doing dawah. And so what happened was, this gentleman people became interested in the message that he was delivering to them. We, as a community, in 1975, upon the death of Imam the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Imam Muhammad became the leader, and the community changed from what we would call the proto-Islamic movement and began to follow the Quran and the tradition of Muhammad the Prophet, praise and peace be upon him.
Many of the times, you know, we look at the story of the Sahaba, or we look at our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we see them as Arabs, right? And people who didn't live during that time frame find it difficult at times to relate to those people.
So in 1975, at one period of time, if I've showed you some of the books in our history books, that you would see that it was like church. There were chairs, and so when he became the leader, he said, "Take the chairs out." He says, "We're going to practice Islam." And so he said, "You ministers have to learn our way of life." And so classes were established to learn how to pray, to learn the 5 pillars, to learn all of the essentials of our way of life. And so now we see we're in our 3rd and our 4th generation, in some cases in our 5th generation of children who were born in this community.
There is so much, what I've gleaned from this story, there's so much rich history that involves African American Muslims and how much they've contributed to Islam in society. And I think we need to do a better job of portraying the history.
And so we began with the door of no return, these two. You see Malcolm and Ali. This is Muhammad when he was young, and Malcolm. And this gentleman that you can barely see, Mr. Mustafa. This is the first time that Ali meets Elijah Muhammad. This is the first Muslim to location in the Senate, Imam Muhammad. And then this picture was taken here. This is a picture of Ali and Imam Muhammad. And they came here because of the gentleman that I told you about, who was talking about who established Muhammad Ali's rotisserie chicken. And so they came here for that. And he had one down in Silver Spring at one time. And there's one in Egypt too. There's one in Egypt.
Pretty much through my whole life, one of the places I felt the most at home has been in the masjid or around
Muslims, and in that process, you really come to recognize that there is already an existing community here that's been thriving for decades upon decades, and a huge and vital part of that is the African American community and the development of it in the United States.
One of the things I want to say, because we have the women here, who was the most learned in Islam? Aisha. The scholars say Aisha was the most learned in Islam. Who helped the Prophet when he came back and said he first received the revelation? Khadija, right? She was the first, and who was the first convert to Islam? Khadija. And Clara Muhammad took Elijah Muhammad to meet with the teacher. So never downplay the role of women in our way of life. Never ever. And there are other great examples of women who have made a significant contribution to this pristine way of life. So never see yourself as a second-class citizen. Let me tell you that.
When I became an attorney, there were no other Muslim female attorneys. Maybe in Maryland, surely not in Baltimore. Especially not one that covered.
Here's something that I think that we should understand. You are in the most different situation and circumstance in the history of Islam. The history of Islam. Why? Because one, you're living in the most diverse place in human history. Religiously, racially, and culturally. That's the United States of America. And two, you're living in the most diverse ummah, the most diverse Muslim community in the history of Islam is here in the United States of America. So how we practically apply our way of life is not going to look like what happened 1,300 years ago, what happened 700 years ago, what happened 200 years ago. How we practically apply our way of life is predicated on our time, space, reality. Never forget that, your students. Never forget that. And you're the ones that are going to be the leaders in this world. Never forget that, inshallah.
It's coming from our heart because we really sincerely care about the community, and the people know that. Because I had a situation one time where Susan said she was coming from Hagerstown. He said, yeah, in Hagerstown growing up, and she said, yeah, they gave me a hard time of being Muslim. But then when I got to Baltimore, they did not give me a hard time. I did not have a hard time. I was accepted here in Baltimore. And that's because a lot of people in Baltimore City respect the Muslim, and also the Muslim give them respect.
Because of Islam and because of the Muslim presence, people in Baltimore City, in the hood, like we say, have developed a respect for Muslims.
I think folks see the sincerity and they feel the sincerity from Muslims when we get involved in the community. I know initially when I started with the Islamic community, when Muslims moved in that community, we were able to make such an impact in terms of closing liquor stores, in terms of getting folks galvanized to really make the type of change in the community to have the quality of life, not only a good quality of life for the Muslim, but the quality of life for the whole community.
Some of this came from the former inmates who became Muslim while in prison. And, we started the prison programs, and you find that some people are Muslim while they're in prison. When the doors open and they leave Islam in prison. Many times while brothers are in prison, their relatives, non-Muslim relatives, will call the mosque, the masjid, and they want to know what to get for them and how they can help their son or their daughter or their brother once they leave the prison. So it's so much so, and I'll say this, continue to say this, that you can go to the deepest part of the hood in Baltimore And we know this. You walk the streets, you can go to Cherry Hill, you can go to East Baltimore, you can go to the deepest, West Baltimore. And as long as you identify with Islam, you'll be surprised that people will respect you because they know that Muslims respect them.
It's important that we maintain understanding our history, and we try to impart that to our young people, because you should be, regardless if your parents are from Pakistan, if they're from Egypt, if they're from Malaysia, regardless, you should always understand where you came from and maintain some of the cultural identity of that. It's very important for you to maintain your cultural identity.
Well, I think one of the contributions that Islam has made to Baltimore is enriching its culture, because prior to the, I guess, upsurge in the presence of Muslims, this was basically an old steel town, basically all either blacks or whites, blue collar, not a lot of cultural things going on, a few, but not in terms of international culture. So now, like you can go somewhere and get falafel or a bean pie or purchase shawwal kameez or dashikis or whatever it is. The idea of a Bluetooth, we used to joke and say that came from Muslim sisters sticking their cell phones, you know where I'm going with this,
Yep,
cell phones in their hijabs. The fact that so many people are comfortable wearing loose clothing or ethnic clothing. The idea that we are a heterogeneous society, that there are a multitude of types of people. Really, that was enriched by, in my opinion, by the Muslims being here, the Muslim presence.
The other thing I think is important to understand is we made this transition in 1975, but in 1964, something very, very important happened, which expanded the Ummah in America. Does anybody know what that was? Yes. The Immigration and Nationality Act. The Immigration and Nationality Act did what? It brought Muslims from all over the world. Now, most of the Muslims that came to America, they were well off, because most of the countries that they came from, they didn't have a middle class. They had an upper class and a lower class. This is why the Muslim world is in the shape that it's in right now.
Growing up as an African-American Muslim, I've always experienced, and unfortunately I have experienced, racism. And it's sad to say that sometimes that comes from the Muslim community. I think we forget that at the end of the day, we are all one and equal. And I think this experience and this beautiful masjid has highlighted the fact that African-American Muslims are as equal as Arab Muslims, Desi Muslims.
So most of the affluent people came to America, your doctors, your engineers, etc. And so, but they didn't come to America to establish Islam, but they came to America for jobs, for employment. And so over time, because of this movement that took place, now this community, it was over 1 million people that converted to what we would say the Quran and the tradition, the Sunnah. So this is 1 million people that converted. 1975, if you look at 1975, there were very few masjids in America. And then all of a sudden, the masjids started springing up. So we've been on this upward mobility for a long time. So please understand that 1964 is a very, very pivotal period of time for Islam in America. Ironically, the slave trade is a very, very specific period of time. The turn of the 1900s is a very, very specific period of time. And going forward, there's going to be another land. This is very, very important because of COVID-19, as well as what has happened with George Floyd and what is taking place in America right now and throughout the world.
You know, as the younger generation, as young American Muslims who are kind of moving into the activism space, that we really need to explore all of the roots of Islam. You know, a lot of the times when we talk about Islam in America, we're kind of talking about the Arab community, the Desi community, what they've done. right? But we need to take a look at, you know, the contributions of the Black community who've been here since slavery.
And so how does the Muslim world, as young people, how are you going to address those things? That's the question.
So in the midst of the national reckoning across our nation after the murder of George Floyd on May 25th in Minnesota, we have an opportunity collectively as Muslims and also the broader interfaith community to truly take on racism and work to eradicate it from our society. And we can only do this if we first educate ourselves on the history, the rich, vibrant history of especially the African American communities across the nation. And right here in Baltimore, we have this opportunity, subhanAllah, to bring forward these stories, these examples, these experiences for others to benefit from, inshallah. So we're very grateful to Imam Earl Elamine and the Muslim Community Cultural Center of Baltimore community, and to all of the diverse centers all across the city of Baltimore who have helped to truly not only pave the way for Muslims in our communities, but who have also built upon generations of experiences and stories and examples to help benefit our generation today, inshallah, so that we can carry this torch forward. And by preserving and recording this history, our aim is, inshallah, to continue to further educate others, inshallah, and to inspire others to continue to learn from this history for our own sake and for our future generation's sake as well.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم طهر قلوبنا وطهر قلوبنا وطهر قلوب أزواجنا. اللهم ارفع كلمة بالحق. وسبحان الله وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك. آمين.